Good morning, everyone. I trust that you are all keeping well. Well done for remembering that on Thursdays it is 10 to 9. That's 8:50. Good morning, Peter, Carol, Rachel, Estelle, and all those that are still joining us. I want to continue and pick up where we were yesterday. Yesterday, you may recall that we spoke about the fact that there are two paradigms when it comes to arguing. You have an argument which is considered worthwhile for the sake of heaven, that's Hillel and Shammai, and then you have an argument which is not for the sake of heaven, and that is Korach and his followers. So when we have an argument that is for the sake, which is not for the sake of heaven, Korach and his followers, what exactly does that mean? Firstly, we know that Korach didn't have an argument with his followers. Korach's argument was with Moshe. That was his axe to grind. It was over Moshe and Aaron's leadership. So it should say that an argument that's not for the sake of heaven, what is that? That's Moshe and Korach and Moshe. Why does it say Korach and his followers? And the answer is that really, we know that very often you can have disparate groups that really don't get on. They don't even like each other. But when there is a common enemy, then they put aside their differences in order to unify for the common good. So it's a marriage of convenience. When Korach and his followers got together, it wasn't that they had the same vision. Korach was in it for himself. The followers that he had were in it for themselves. Everyone had a slightly different agenda. There wasn't this common shared goal that they were all working as a team for the common good. And therefore, an argument that is not for the sake of heaven, that is Korach and his followers. That is something that is not going to endure. It has no purpose. It has no meaning. So I guess the question that I'm left with, and maybe you can share your opinions, because in the course of life, inevitably, as we all know, that we argue. We argue throughout our lives. And I guess the question is, when do you know whether it is correct, whether it is right to argue? And when do you know that it's wrong to argue? We get embroiled in all different types of conflicts and disputes and arguments, and we beg to differ, many different expressions of the same thing. But when is it correct to have an argument and when is it not? It's a really tricky one. Why is it so tricky for us to know? Because we all come with stuff. We come with our biases. We come with our agenda. We come with our own self-interest. And therefore we are not impartial. We're not objective. There's that ambition, that drive, that ego that drives us forward and wants us to colors our vision, and therefore we don't see things in the cold light of day. It's really a matter of recognizing that we have these I guess, how would we describe it? We have these biases which color our vision. And once we are, how do we do that? I think the best way to do that is what we mentioned earlier in Ethics of the Fathers, and that is to acquire a good friend. I do this, I don't acquire friends, but I have one friend in particular, one or two friends in particular, and when something comes up, and I'm not sure, is it right or is it wrong? Am I in this for my own self-interest, or am I really arguing, or am I really, am I making my point from coming from the right place? And if you can bounce ideas off somebody, then you'll know whether it is coming from your stuff or is it really, that there's a pure motive within it. And that's why we say that the argument that is for the sake of heaven, that is Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai, they fought like cat and dog. They fought every day, and their descendants became the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. And they also argued. But what's interesting is this was never personal. There was no self-interest here. There was no ulterior motive here. Hillel would argue with Shammai purely on the issues because he felt that this issue was right. He came around the other side of the table. He looked at Shammai's perspective and he saw that he still believed that he was right. And Shammai did the same. And I'll prove it to you. Just a couple of generations later, Hillel and Shammai, these great people that spent their lives arguing over principles, over ideals, over legalistic terms in the Torah, their descendants married each other. So there was no feud, there was no axe to grind, there was no umbrage, there was no bearing any type of gripe against anyone else. It was, it's not about me, it's about the issue. I see it from this perspective, you see it from this perspective. We're both coming with a pure motive, and therefore we're just looking at the concept through a different prism, and therefore we're both pursuers of truth, and therefore we love each other, we respect each other. They asked the question, Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, he asked the following question: why is it that adults and kids, you see kids, they're always happy? Why is it that adults, they're not always happy? And the answer is because children put being happy above being right. If you take a child will fight over something, but eventually he doesn't hold grudges. He's not going to be, he's not going to keep the feud going for days and weeks. It's forgotten very quickly. Why? Because the highest context marker for a child is happiness. For an adult, it's about being right. And I'm prepared to stick to my guns, to become entrenched, to become intransigent, and to stick to what I am saying, even though it means that I'm going to continue a feud and I'm going to be unhappy. I'd rather be right. I'd rather see myself as being right rather than being happy. It's such a tragedy because we all know that really what we want for ourselves deep down is for us to be happy, to be content. And therefore, you have to ask yourself, is it right in continuing this feud to perpetuate this argument, this disagreement and conflict? And sometimes we have to bury the hatchet. We'll just conclude with one little story. Actually, we're not going to have time for the story. We'll have to do the story tomorrow because I'm already just looked at the clock and I'm running late. So suffice to say, the principle is there for us all to see. The principle of recognizing the difference in these two paradigms, the paradigm of an argument for the sake of heaven with the purest of intentions, without ulterior motive, without bearing grudges and biases. And on the other hand, Korach and his followers, that it was just a marriage of convenience, and it was all about the here and now, what I can get out of it. And therefore that it dressed up their self-interest with language that it was all about a lofty principle, when in reality it wasn't. So an important idea, an important concept for us to bear in mind in our own lives, how we react and how we respond and how we conduct ourselves in our interpersonal relationships. And perhaps we should consider the way of children. Happiness is more important than always being right. Have a great day. See you later. Tomorrow 9 a.m.